In this class, we will improve our spoken English with the Hollywood movie named The Curious Case of Benjamin Button, 2008. If you find this video useful, please like the video and subscribe to the channel. Thanks for your support. In the city of New Orleans, on a night filled with sorrow and war, a baby was born under the most unusual circumstances. The year was 1918, and the world was just beginning to heal from the destruction of World War I. The streets were dark, the air was heavy with grief, and inside a large house, a woman was screaming in pain as she gave birth to her first child. Her husband, Thomas Button, waited anxiously outside the room, pacing back and forth. He was a wealthy man, a businessman who had worked hard to build his fortune. He had dreamed of this moment, of holding his newborn child in his arms and celebrating the future of the Button family. But fate had other plans. Inside the room, the doctors and nurses whispered among themselves, their faces pale with shock. The baby they had just delivered was not an ordinary newborn. His skin was wrinkled like an old man's, his hair was thin and white, and his eyes were filled with a strange sadness. He had the body of an elderly man, as if time had played a cruel trick on him. The mother, exhausted from childbirth, looked at her baby with love, even though she knew something was terribly wrong. With her last breath, she whispered to her husband, "Love him, Thomas. Promise me." And then she was gone. Thomas Button, now a widower, walked into the room and saw his child for the first time. His heart pounded with fear and disbelief. What is this?" he stammered, looking at the small, wrinkled creature in the nurse's arms. "This is your son, Mr. Button," the doctor said carefully. "He is different." But Thomas did not see a son. He saw a monster. His grief quickly turned to shame, and he felt sick at the thought of raising such a child. That night, while the city slept, Thomas wrapped the baby in a blanket and ran through the streets, his mind clouded with fear and confusion. He reached a nursing home, a place where old people lived their last days. He placed the baby on the doorstep and knocked on the door before disappearing into the night. A kind woman named Queenie, who worked at the nursing home, opened the door and gasped when she saw the tiny, wrinkled baby lying there. She picked him up and held him close, feeling his small body shiver in the cold air. "Oh, sweet Lord," she whispered, "a baby, but he looks like an old man." The other residents of the home gathered around, their faces filled with curiosity and concern. But Queenie, who had always wanted a child of her own, saw something special in the baby. She smiled and said, "He's not ugly. He's just different. And God don't make mistakes." She decided to raise him as her own and named him Benjamin. Benjamin grew up surrounded by old people, which in many ways made sense because he looked like one of them. But unlike the other elderly residents, Benjamin was not growing older. He was growing younger. As the years passed, his body slowly changed. He became stronger, his back straightened, and he no longer needed a wheelchair to move around. Even though he had the appearance of an old man, inside he was still a child. He was curious, full of wonder, and eager to explore the world. He loved listening to the stories of the elderly residents, learning about love, loss, and the adventures they had lived. But deep inside, he always felt different. He did not understand why he was not like other children. One day, when he was still small in his heart, but looked like an old man, he met a girl named Daisy. She was the granddaughter of one of the residents. Daisy was full of life, her bright blue eyes shining with excitement. She moved gracefully like a little dancer, and she was fascinated by Benjamin. "Why do you look so old?" she asked him one day, tilting her head. Benjamin shrugged. "I don't know," he said honestly. "But I'm not old. Not really." Daisy smiled. "I like you, Benjamin." From that moment, they became the best of friends. Years passed, and while Daisy grew into a young woman, Benjamin grew younger. By the time he was in his 20s, he no longer looked like an old man. He had the body of a middle-aged man, strong and full of life. He wanted to see the world beyond the nursing home, so he joined a tugboat crew and set off on an adventure. He traveled to different places, met new people, and even fell in love for the first time. In Russia, he had an affair with a beautiful woman who taught him about love and heartbreak. But no matter where he went, he could never forget Daisy. Meanwhile, Daisy was pursuing her dream of becoming a dancer in New York. She was graceful and talented, but life was not always easy. She fell in love with other men, but deep inside, she always thought of Benjamin. One day, Benjamin returned home. By now, Daisy had become a beautiful young woman, and he had become younger, now looking like a man in his 30s. When they saw each other again, their hearts raced. Daisy was surprised to see how young he looked, how handsome he had become. But their love was complicated. Daisy wanted a normal life, a life where she and her partner would grow old together. But Benjamin was moving in the opposite direction. He was afraid of what the future would bring. One night, Daisy told him, "Benjamin, I love you, but I don't know if I can do this. We're going in different directions." Benjamin's heart broke, but he loved her too much to hold her back. "I understand," he said quietly. And with that, he let her go. Years passed. Daisy continued her life as a dancer, and Benjamin continued growing younger. But fate had other plans. One day, Daisy had a terrible accident that ended her dancing career. When Benjamin heard the news, he rushed to see her. This time, she did not push him away. She was tired of running, tired of pretending that she did not love him. They finally came together, knowing that their time was limited. For a while, they lived a happy life, filled with laughter and love. Daisy became pregnant, and Benjamin was overjoyed, but also deeply afraid. He knew he could not be a father like other men. One day he would become too young to take care of his own child. As the baby grew inside Daisy's womb, Benjamin made a painful decision. He left. He did not want his daughter to grow up watching her father become a child. He wanted her to have a normal life, a father who could be there for her. Daisy was heartbroken, but she understood. Benjamin wandered alone, growing younger and younger. He traveled the world, but he was losing his memories. By the time he returned to New Orleans, he was a teenager, then a child, then a toddler. One day, Daisy received a call. A young boy had been found, lost and confused. He did not know who he was, but he had Benjamin's eyes. Daisy took him in and cared for him. Every day she read to him, held him, and watched as he became smaller and smaller. One evening, as the sun set outside the window, Daisy cradled him in her arms. He looked up at her with innocent eyes. He did not know her name, but he felt safe. He smiled softly, then closed his eyes. And just like that, he was gone. Daisy sat there for a long time, holding him close, remembering the man he had once been. She knew that no one would ever believe their story. But she did not care. She had loved him in every stage of his life, and he had loved her in return. Years later, Daisy's daughter, Caroline, found Benjamin's diary. She finally understood the father she never knew. She stood by the lake where he had once sailed and felt the wind on her face. She knew that, somewhere out there, Benjamin's soul was free, moving with time in a way no one else ever could. And so the story of Benjamin Button ended the way it had begun, not with death, but with life. A life that had moved in reverse, yet was filled with love, loss, and the beauty of time itself.
Landon Carter was the kind of boy who didn't think much about his future. He was a teenager who spent his days with a group of friends who shared his rebellious, carefree nature. They would often roam the streets of their small town in North Carolina, pulling pranks and getting into trouble, never worrying about the consequences. Landon was charming and confident, the kind of boy who seemed to have everything figured out. Or so he thought. Jamie Sullivan was the exact opposite. She was quiet, thoughtful, and kind. The daughter of the local pastor, she spent most of her time reading, studying, or helping others. She wasn't concerned with popularity or appearances. Jamie carried a Bible with her everywhere she went, and her faith was her guiding light. To many of her classmates, she was strange, even a little too serious for her age. But Jamie didn't mind. She lived her life with purpose, even if others didn't understand her. Landon and Jamie's paths crossed many times in school, but they couldn't have been further apart in how they saw the world. Landon barely noticed her, and when he did, it was often to mock her with his friends. Jamie, however, always treated him with kindness, no matter how cruel he or his friends could be. One night, everything changed. Landon and his friends decided to play a prank on a fellow student that went terribly wrong. The boy ended up seriously injured, and Landon was caught. As punishment, the school principal gave him two choices: face expulsion or participate in several after-school activities, including tutoring younger students and taking part in the school's spring play. Reluctantly, Landon chose the latter, not knowing how much this decision would alter the course of his life. Landon's new responsibilities were a struggle at first. He wasn't used to being accountable, and he found the tasks boring and beneath him. But the school play was particularly difficult. Landon had no experience in acting, and he was paired with none other than Jamie Sullivan, who had the lead female role. Jamie took the play seriously, as she did with everything, and her dedication only annoyed Landon. During one of their rehearsals, Landon found himself frustrated and blurted out, "Why do you even care about this so much? No one's going to see this play, except a bunch of parents." Jamie looked at him calmly and replied, "Because when you commit to something, it's important to give it your best. Maybe one day you'll understand." Her words stayed with him, though he didn't fully realize why. Jamie was different from anyone he had ever met. There was something about her unwavering faith and kindness that made him uneasy. She wasn't trying to impress anyone, and she certainly didn't care what he thought of her. As rehearsals continued, Landon began to notice things about Jamie he hadn't seen before. She wasn't just the quiet, strange girl he thought she was. She had a warmth about her, a genuine kindness that made people feel seen and valued. She was patient, even when he made mistakes, and she had a quiet strength that intrigued him. For the first time, Landon started to see Jamie as more than just the preacher's daughter. One day, in a moment of desperation during rehearsals, Landon asked Jamie for help with his lines. At first, she hesitated. "I'll help you," she said, "but only if you promise not to fall in love with me." Landon laughed, thinking she was joking. "I think I can handle that," he said with a smirk. But as they spent more time together, Landon began to realize that Jamie wasn't like any other girl he had ever known. She had a light about her, something pure and real, and it was impossible not to be drawn to her. The night of the play arrived, and Landon found himself nervous for the first time in a long while. When Jamie walked onto the stage in her costume, singing with a voice that was both powerful and delicate, Landon felt his breath catch. She was beautiful, more beautiful than he had ever imagined. In that moment, something shifted inside him. He couldn't explain it, but he knew he was seeing Jamie in a completely new way. After the play, Landon found himself wanting to spend more time with Jamie. He began walking her home, asking her questions about her life and her beliefs. Jamie was cautious at first, unsure of his intentions, but she slowly opened up. She told him about her dreams, her faith, and her deep belief in the power of love and forgiveness. Landon, who had always been skeptical of such things, found himself listening intently, wanting to understand her world. As they grew closer, Landon started to change. He began distancing himself from his old friends and their reckless behavior. He found joy in the small, meaningful moments he shared with Jamie. He even started going to church with her, something he never thought he would do. Jamie's influence was subtle but profound. She made him want to be a better person, not for her, but for himself. But Jamie had a secret, one she had kept hidden from everyone except her father. She was battling leukemia, and her time was limited. Jamie had made peace with her illness, trusting that it was part of God's plan, but she feared what it would mean for Landon. She didn't want to burden him with her pain or let him fall in love with someone he couldn't have a future with. When Landon finally found out about Jamie's illness, he was devastated. "Why didn't you tell me?" he asked, his voice shaking with emotion. "I didn't want you to see me like this," Jamie said softly. "I didn't want you to fall in love with me." "But I already have," Landon replied, his eyes filled with tears. "And I'm not going anywhere." From that moment on, Landon dedicated himself to making Jamie's remaining days as beautiful and full of love as possible. He took her on dates, fulfilled her wishes, and showed her a kind of love she had only dreamed of. They danced under the stars, watched the sunset together, and shared moments of pure joy. For Jamie, it wasn't about the quantity of time they had, but the quality. And for Landon, it was a lesson in what it truly meant to love someone selflessly. As Jamie's condition worsened, Landon remained by her side. He read to her, held her hand, and prayed with her. He even asked her father for permission to marry her, knowing that their time together would be short. Jamie's father, though hesitant, gave his blessing, moved by the love Landon had for his daughter. On a sunny day, surrounded by their closest friends and family, Landon and Jamie exchanged vows. Jamie wore a simple white dress, and her face radiated with happiness. It was a day filled with love, faith, and hope, a testament to the beauty of their connection. Jamie passed away not long after their wedding, leaving Landon heartbroken but forever changed. Her love and faith had transformed him, teaching him the importance of compassion, forgiveness, and living with purpose. Landon went on to pursue a meaningful life, carrying Jamie's memory with him in everything he did. Years later, as Landon looked back on his time with Jamie, he realized that she had given him a gift far greater than he could have ever imagined. She had shown him how to love deeply, to believe in something greater than himself, and to find beauty in even the most difficult moments. Jamie's love had been a light in his life, and that light would guide him forever.
The story begins on a quiet winter evening in Chicago, where snow blankets the city streets and frost laces the windows of homes and shops. Paige and Leo, a young married couple deeply in love, are driving home after a romantic evening. Their laughter fills the car as they talk about their plans for the future, from Paige's latest art project to Leo's growing recording studio business. Theirs is a life built on shared dreams and unwavering affection, the kind of love that feels rare and precious. As they drive through the serene streets, Paige leans over to kiss Leo. Her hands rest lightly on his arm, her eyes full of warmth. It's a moment so ordinary, yet so meaningful, one of those small gestures that define the rhythm of their relationship. But in an instant, their world is shattered. A truck runs a stop sign and barrels into their car, the deafening sound of metal crunching against metal echoing in the still night. Paige is thrown forward, crashing through the windshield, her body flung like a rag doll into the icy air. Time seems to slow as Leo, stunned and helpless, calls out her name, his voice cracking with fear. When Paige opens her eyes, the world feels foreign and fragmented. She's in a hospital room, her body covered in bruises and her head wrapped in bandages. Machines beep steadily around her, monitoring her vitals. Beside her sits Leo, his hands clutching hers tightly, his eyes red-rimmed from hours of waiting and worrying. "Paige," he whispers, his voice trembling with relief. But instead of responding with the love and recognition he expects, she looks at him with confusion. "Who are you?" she asks, her voice weak but certain. Leo's heart breaks as those 3 words sink in. The doctors explain that Paige has suffered severe memory loss due to the traumatic brain injury she sustained in the accident. She doesn't remember the last 5 years of her life, a period that includes her entire relationship with Leo. To her, he is a stranger, and her life as she knows it has been erased. The Paige, lying in the hospital bed, believes she is still a law student, engaged to her ex-fiancé, Jeremy. and living under the protective wing of her wealthy parents. The life she built with Leo, the love they shared, and the vows they made are gone. Determined to help Paige recover her memories, Leo takes her home to their apartment. The space is a reflection of their shared life, a cozy, creative sanctuary filled with Paige's sculptures, Polaroid photos of their adventures, and little mementos from their time together. Leo points out their favorite spots: the couch where they spent lazy Sundays watching movies, the kitchen where they experimented with new recipes, and the small balcony where they shared countless cups of coffee. He tells her stories about their life, weaving together moments of joy and love in the hope that something will spark her memory. But Paige feels like an outsider in her own home. The life Leo describes doesn't resonate with her, and the person he remembers seems like a stranger. She looks at the photos on the wall, the smiles frozen in time, and wonders why she can't feel the connection that seems so obvious to him. Her frustration grows as she struggles to reconcile her present self with the version of her that Leo loves so deeply. Things become even more complicated when Paige's parents, Bill and Rita, enter the picture. They haven't been part of her life for years, but now they see an opportunity to bring her back into their fold. Paige doesn't remember why she distanced herself from them, and their presence feels comforting in a way. Her parents suggest that she return to their luxurious home, where she can be surrounded by familiarity and stability. Leo protests, pleading with Paige to stay and work through this together, but she feels overwhelmed and unsure. Torn between the life she can't remember and the one she feels drawn to, Paige decides to leave with her parents. At her parents' estate, Paige is reintroduced to the life she left behind. She reconnects with old friends from law school and spends time with Jeremy, her ex-fiancé. Jeremy is everything her parents want for her: successful, charming, and dependable. He is thrilled to see Paige again, viewing her memory loss as a second chance for them to be together. Paige finds comfort in the familiarity of this world, but something feels off. The more time she spends with Jeremy, the more she realizes that their relationship, while stable, lacks the spark and depth she craves. Meanwhile, Leo is struggling. He feels like he's losing Paige all over again and can't shake the sense of helplessness that has settled over him. Desperate to remind her of their love, he takes her to places that hold significance for them: the cafe where they had their first date, the park where he proposed, and the gallery where she once showcased her artwork. He shows her their wedding photos and shares the story of their vows, hoping that the power of their love will break through the fog of her memory. But no matter what he does, Paige remains distant, her heart and mind caught between two worlds. As Paige spends more time with her parents, she begins to see cracks in the perfect image they present. One evening, she overhears an argument between her mother and father and learns that her father had an affair with one of her friends, a betrayal that deeply hurt her in the past. This revelation leaves her feeling confused and betrayed. She begins to question the choices she made and wonders why she forgave her parents or chose to distance herself from them. The perfect world they've created for her starts to feel hollow. Feeling lost, Paige decides to visit her old art studio, a small, cluttered space filled with sculptures, tools, and memories. As she walks through the studio, she feels a sense of connection she can't explain. She runs her hands over the clay and metal, remembering the joy of creating something with her own hands. While she doesn't recall specific moments, the act of working with her materials brings her a sense of peace and clarity. For the first time since the accident, Paige feels like she's rediscovering a part of herself. One night, after much reflection, Paige decides to leave her parents' home. She tells them she needs to figure things out on her own and moves back into the apartment she shared with Leo. It's not an easy decision, and she's honest with Leo about her feelings. "I don't remember us," she says, her voice heavy with emotion, "but I want to try." Leo, overwhelmed with relief, promises to support her every step of the way. Together, Paige and Leo start to rebuild their relationship. They go on dates, share stories, and create new memories. Slowly, Paige begins to see why she fell in love with Leo. She admires his kindness, his sense of humor, and his unwavering devotion to her. One day, while going through some old belongings, she finds a notebook filled with sketches and notes. Among the pages, she discovers a copy of the wedding vow she wrote for Leo. In it, she promised to love him unconditionally through every challenge they might face. Reading those words brings tears to her eyes. Even though she doesn't remember writing them, she feels their truth in her heart. In the end, Paige never regains her lost memories, but she and Leo decide to move forward together. They accept that their love will never be the same as it was before, but that doesn't mean it can't be just as strong. They start fresh, building a new life filled with love, trust, and hope. Paige continues to pursue her art, finding inspiration in her work, while Leo supports her every step of the way. Their journey is not easy, but it is worth it. Together, they prove that love is not just about the past, it's about the future they choose to create. And this brings us to the end of the video. If you have learned anything from this video, please give us a thumbs up and don't forget to subscribe our channel. Thank you for watching and supporting.